Hey guys, Jim Vinoski with Manufacturing Talks. Today I'm solo. Those of you who've been paying attention to my Substack know that January is going to be focused on shipbuilding. I've had a previous show and an article about it already. Decided to drill into it deeper. So I'm going to dive into the number one topic right now to me, which is why can't America build ships? Be right back in a minute to talk more about that here on Manufacturing Talks. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinoski. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Okay, so this is going to be a short episode. It's just me, and I'm going to talk about shipbuilding. So, for me, I guess I've known for a while that things weren't great in the shipbuilding world, but I didn't really start to learn how bad things are for the U.S. until a little over a year ago. That's when I came across an article in Construction Physics by Brian Potter, and it's entitled, "Why Can't the U.S. Build Ships?" So there's a great title for my show today, because that's what we got to drill into first. It's absolutely vital that we do build ships, both domestically and militarily, and we're not doing it today. So, just on sheer numbers, where we were close to 60% of shipbuilding capacity for the world after World War II, we are now at about 0.3%. So America on ocean-going ships is making maybe at best 5 a year, while the Chinese are making over 1,000. Koreans are making, 700, 600, 400, I guess, over the past few years. Europe is even making several hundred. Japan is in the 500 ship range. And yeah, we're in lower single digits. Now, there's a whole lot that goes into that, and I just want to run through Brian's article. And if anyone knows Brian, I've been trying to get hold of him because I'd love to have him on my show and have him drill into this for you. But I'm just going to go through a couple of things on his article. The first surprise to me, because I've studied so much about manufacturing, and so much of the hollowing out of American manufacturing goes back to between the late 70s, early 80s, after the oil embargo and oil crunch, and then into the turn of the century when we had China enter the World Trade Organization, gave them most favored nation status. But shipbuilding it isn't that way. So I was really surprised to learn that American shipbuilding, we haven't been really competitive since the days of the wooden ships. Now that shocked the heck out of me, and I hope it shocks you too, because that's certainly not the case with most of American manufacturing. Now, for a long time we could build good ships, but we couldn't build them competitively. So a big piece of that is steel. The U.S. obviously being one of the first nations to industrialize, we had our labor costs start going up much earlier, and that hit all of manufacturing. And steel being just such a huge piece of shipbuilding, that cost, as it increased, became a big part of that problem. That didn't really come home to roost, though, because by the time that all started shaking out, we were getting into the 20th century. And the thing that came along that kind of, I guess, masked that was war. And so we had the two world wars. And as a result, we obviously bolstered our shipbuilding. The government got very involved, especially in World War II. If you haven't read about American shipbuilding in World War II, you should, because the government obviously spent a lot of money, but we had some really amazing things happening in the manufacturing space there that kind of countered some of that lack of competitiveness. So the story of Henry Kaiser and his new shipbuilding methods, the modularized shipbuilding, maybe didn't make us truly competitive, but that's why we were able to get to where we did. We were making the world's ships during the war. You had our allies who were right there in the thick of the battles and having their industrial capacity assaulted by the actual war itself, where we were here on an island to ourselves and shielded from that. So World War II comes and goes. That's when it really started to become apparent what was going on. So building large ships, again, we were up right around 60% at the end of the war. And then you come into the 1950s and it really starts to drop dramatically from there. By the turn of the century, we were down below 20%. We hovered at about the 20% mark there for a while. So there were a whole lot of things that went into it. Again, we had the things like the government regulations with the EPA and OSHA. I've talked incessantly about that. What I say, offshoring misery, where we sent all our manufacturing to countries where they despoil the environment and they treat their people like hell, but that makes them more competitive in manufacturing. But there were a whole lot of other things. I mean, I've talked about unions. Unions definitely played a part with shipbuilding. I just read a book about the Edmund Fitzgerald, and the author there, John U. Bacon, was talking about how unions would basically dictate the terms and no one would question them back in the 20th century when they had their maximum power. So that certainly played a part. But basically, the U.S. had a lot of disadvantages that made us uncompetitive. But honestly, the other thing is we just weren't doing the job. I mean, reading Brian's article, it's very clear that we weren't doing the things our competitors were doing around advancing our shipbuilding skills. So even Britain, which was a key leader during the original days of steel shipbuilding, lost to Japan and then Korea and then China like we did. And they were doing a much better job than we were of keeping their shipbuilding skills current. And so, there's this whole morass of things that just have smacked us right between the eyes. I mean, the U.S. of all the major powers is doing the absolute worst. We had a bounce back in the 70s. So the government invested heavily at that point, realizing that we were not where we needed to be. And the shipbuilding companies actually started studying what the best were doing and adopting some of those practices, starting to bring some of what we should have learned during World War II about efficient shipbuilding, again, the modular building, the labor-saving standards that Henry Kaiser and his company instituted, started getting after those, but it didn't really take hold. And then, you had the Jones Act that kind of protected things, and Reagan and his cost cutting, which I largely support, and I don't know the details behind this, but he cut some of the subsidies to shipbuilding when he came along in the 80s, and then it was just a plummet from there. And again, we dropped down to next to nothing. And so to me, there's a couple of lessons here. One is government focus is needed. I had Brent Sadler on it. If you didn't see that episode, I'd recommend you go back and watch it. He was very clear, and he's an ex-Navy submarine captain, very clear about the need for government to invest not only in military shipbuilding, but in the domestic side, because the two march in lockstep. And so you need that investment. But what we see with how the government invested, really going back before the 20th century, so more than 100 years of up and down government investment, it wasn't invested wisely. And that's where I really struggle with some of the ideas around tariffs and subsidies is, yes, when our competitors are subsidizing their own production and making us uncompetitive, we have to counter that in some regard. But then how do you effectively promote adopting of best practices and making our companies truly competitive on the things that they compete on? The quality, our shipbuilding quality went to hell late in the 20th century. cost obviously is huge. How do we offset that without having free riders? I don't know the answers. I know that's something where the government really should get with industry experts and really hash through what makes for good government investment to both offset some of those things that are the unfair practices by our competitor countries, but also promote the adopting of best practices and the making of our shipbuilding private companies into true competitors. So if you haven't read Brian's article, again, it's from September 2024. It was on the Construction Physics website. I will include a link, and it is very aptly titled, "Why Can't the U.S. Build Ships?" So I recommend you go read that. And through the rest of January, I mean, I'm going to be talking about this article in my next Substack as well, and bringing you some guests and some other commentators to talk about what we need to do to counter what I've just talked about and where we go from here, how we get ourselves back on the right road. I mean, it's going to be the work of decades to get where we need to be for shipbuilding, but no better time to start than now, right? Stay tuned. I'm Jim Vinoski with Manufacturing Talks. We will be back here next Tuesday. I know this one's a little late, but back on the Tuesday regular shows. And yeah, through January, we'll be focused on shipbuilding. Come on back and let's talk about it. And definitely, please, look in the comments or the show write-up for the link to this article, and then jump in the comments. Give me your thoughts. I mean, I'd love to hear from people on how we invest from a nation's standpoint, a national investment standpoint, to be more effective at this. Give me your thoughts. Come on back next Tuesday. We'll do it again. Jim Vinoski, so long.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinoski. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.